October, it'll be 2 years. One of the programs that the Naturals had previously was Brown Bag, and so every month we have a lunch program. Usually runs from about 11:30 to 12:30 on all different types of topics. And if there's anything you want to hear about or anything you want to learn about, please feel free to let me know. I'm always looking for new ideas, and it's nice to know what people in the public want to hear about. So this one is bee house. So I've seen bee houses all over the place lately, and of course there's been lots of talks about bee and bee populations. And so I was kind of curious about them, and I started doing some research on them, and there's a lot of information out there, and it's not all the same. So it is going to be a little bit of an experiment for whether you'll get bees to it, what kind of bees you'll get to it, and the maintenance and things like that. So me and my maintenance staff sat down and kind of talked about the different possibilities of the types of bee houses, as well as doing some research online on different types of bees and what kind of bees are attracted to the building. So we'll talk about a little bit about that in this process. But up here you'll see that these are different types of bee houses. You can buy these, and they actually have cardboard tubes that go in them. If you want to increase the odds of the survival of your bees, then you can harvest the cocoons in the fall, put them in your refrigerator, and have the bees hibernate in your refrigerator, and then put them back out in the spring. You also have to give them a bath in bleach water solution. I'm not going to get into that. I'm more of the survival, Darwin, hopefully they make it kind of mindset on bee houses. So there is research on if you want to get a really healthy population. Lots of times those are the mason bees, so the blue orchard bees. Those are the bees that they are raising to actually pollinate almond trees and peach trees and apple trees, or well, cherry trees out on the West Coast. So they actually buy these populations of these mason bees, and so it's an investment to them to help increase their produce. So that's a little bit more serious step. These, I would say, are more for small gardeners and just wanting to increase habitat for bees in general. So that's what these kind are. This is a log. This is one we were thinking about doing. This is a log. The size is a big difference, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but they literally just drilled holes into it. It helps if the holes are smooth. The bees are a little picky about that, and it can also damage their wings, especially the new ones emerging. So smooth holes just drilled into a log would work as well. Always trying to find a little bit of shelter for them, prevent the wind and the rain. And then this is a very elaborate one. This is large scale. And it kind of shows different holes, different sizes, and different habitats, things you can attract them with. So a little bit more here. So bee species in general, when we think of bees, we all think about bumblebees or honeybees. That's when our mind goes to it, but that's actually only 1% of the different bee species in the United States. So honeybees and bumblebees are a very, very small amount of the different types of bees. Over 4,000 different species in the United States and Canada. They're still finding additional species every day. Well, maybe not every day, but they still find them quite often. And here in Iowa, there have been recorded of 300 different species. Now, saying that, some of those species were found back in 1875, 1904. So whether or not those species are still here, it's not 100% sure, because wild bee populations are very, very hard to keep track of and monitor. So those 300 species are, of course, wild bee species. Honeybees are not native to North America. So the honeybees that we have were all introduced from Europe. You may have heard, if anyone here has honeybees or knows people that raise honeybees, you can get different, they're from different countries. Like you can get Italian bees, you can get German bees. They have different personalities. Some are mean, some are not. Some make more honey, some are more resistant to mites and things like that. But all of those honeybees are introduced. They are not found here wild in Iowa. So the honeybees that you find wild out maybe making a hive in a tree are actually have been brought over, introduced here, probably escaped from a hive. If the hive had too many bees or they didn't like the situation, then they moved out, and then they found a place that they thought was more suitable out in the wild. So, but that is just a small percentage of all the different species of bees. There was a new research study done, and they found a 23% decline in entire United States of wild bee populations from 2008 to 2013. In the Great Plains area, it's 39%. So again, this is a lot of computer programming and things like that to figure out, because wild bee populations are very difficult to be able to monitor. And that comes from habitat loss, monocultures. When we plant all to corn or all to soybeans, what we do is we really limit the amount of pollination and food source they have year round. So they can struggle with finding food sources. Insecticides, all different types of things are affecting them. Global warming is affecting them. Disease, invasive species. So they're facing a lot of issues, and even the introduced species like the honeybees, they're going through colony collapse disorder, and so the bees are really struggling with their populations, and that's why we're going to be building bee houses. Now, when it comes to bees, there's a lot of things out there, but are they really bees? Look at those pictures up there, and I want you to, maybe in your head, or you can say it out loud, how many of those do you think are truly bees? You ready? You want me to flip it? What do you guys, you got to get any guesses? What do you think? One. Just one is a true bee. And the ones that are bees that don't look like any of these are kind of amazing as well. So, and you would probably think, oh, that doesn't even look like a bee. That looks more like a fly. So the common confusing ones are wasps and flies. And of course, they're mimicking bees for a reason, or that yellow and black is a warning. I'm going to sting you. So the flies mimic bees because they don't have the stingers. But things are going to be a little bit more cautious of it because they're afraid they're going to get stung by it. Now, when it comes to stinging, all bees, I shouldn't say all bees because there's always exceptions, but most bees sting. We think, oh, they sting, they die. Only bees that have that problem are honeybees. Most bees can sting multiple times. The bee houses that we are building are very docile bees, and they only sting if you accidentally squish them. So the bees that you're going to be attracting to your yard with this house are not going to be aggressive. They're not going to chase you. They're not going to sting you, kind of thing. Sometimes some wasp species are a little bit more aggressive. So just one, and that was the little honeybee down there. And how you identify the difference, first and foremost, bees have 4 wings. Flies do not. Flies only have 2 wings, which is kind of an odd thing on insects. So these guys down here, you'll notice they only have 2 sets of wings. Oftentimes that's hard to tell because they overlap their wings anyways. But another good identification factor with the flies is that they have pretty big eyes. Okay, they have those big domed eyes with the multiple lenses on them. And they usually are more forward facing on the front of their heads, where bees are more off to the sides a little bit. They have stout legs. So if you look at wasp legs, they tend to have long, skinny legs, same with the flies. And they tend to have little spurs on them as well, where the bee, if you look at this bee's legs, are pretty stout. And they don't have these little notches or spurs all over them like the wasps do. The separation of the abdomen, wasps have a very clear waistline. So their thorax, where their legs and wings are attached to, versus their abdomen, where all their hearts, how they breathe, all of that stuff is actually located in their abdomen. But they have a pretty clear, skinny waistline. Whereas flies, they don't really have a waistline at all, and the bees are kind of the happy medium. So that one's a little bit harder to see and compare. Bees tend to be really furry and have thick, hairy bodies. And then, like I said before, their eyes are much more clearly on the side of their head versus the flies. But Bees can be all different colors, blues, reds, blacks, whites, all different colors. So that basic yellow and black does not necessarily signify that you are looking at a bee. Now we say, oh, bees, we know they're important, they pollinate stuff, but they're really important. So up here, we've got all different plants that bees pollinate. 70% of plants, vegetables, we're looking at bees do some sort of pollination, whereas these that I've listed, they're major, bees are major importance of pollinating. The most important ones up there that leads, even if you're not a fruit and veggie person, alfalfa is huge, and that one I think there's 70 or 80% of all alfalfa is pollinated by bees to reproduce seed. So when you're thinking of feeding cattle and other livestock, bees again are very, very important. So lots of different yummy foods up there that bees are a major part of. Hello. So when we think of bees, we think they all live in hives, right? Or most of the time we think of bees living in hives. And the fact is that very few bees are social like that and live together and work together. Most bees are what we call solitary. And so they actually live in different locations that they live by themselves. They take care of their own young, they get their own food, and all of that information. All that stuff goes together. So where most bees live in the ground. In fact, over 50% live in the ground. Your bumblebees live in the ground. Sometimes bumblebees can live in groups in the ground, but a lot of times they're just solitary and they live in the ground. And a lot of bees produce this material that they line the burrow with their mouths and it's like a cellophane-like material. And then that way they can put their pollen and their nectar in there, and then they lay their eggs, and that keeps any bacteria and fungus out of where they laid their eggs, so then the eggs can grow up healthy and hatch out and grow. So that's what that first two pictures are, is the cellophane-like material that they line their burrows with to help keep their eggs from getting contaminated. And this material is, I guess, quite industrial strength, because scientists have tried to melt it and it does not melt. And they've also tried to dilute it with all different types of chemicals, and it does not break down in chemicals either. So it's pretty impressive stuff that they create with their mouths. Now, a lot of these bees that do burrow then have very strong mandibles that they use their mouths to be able to move around the dirt, rocks, and soil. And so lots of times the larger mandible bees will be in the burrows, in the ground burrows. Of course, hives, I've got 3 different types of hives. Most of the hives we think of are the beehive there that is ran by a human being. Sometimes they will leave those hives and they'll go and they'll build them on trees. If you see a hive like this, that's not normally a good sign for those bees, because the likelihood of them surviving, I'm guessing that picture is probably taken somewhere warm, although they will do that here in Iowa, but then they won't survive the winter because they have no protection. More likely you find bees in walls of houses, old abandoned barns, things like that, where they can do a little bit better, or in hollow trees as well. Basswoods are some of their favorite trees to use, along with catalpas. They're usually hollow, and they also have a really good nectar source. So those are the hives, but those are, you're looking at your honeybees there. So the ones that we're building our bee houses for are for the twig dwellers. And so that means that they live actually in twigs. If you had elderberry or bad things like Japanese knotweed, different plants that have hollow stems, they would chew a hole into those stems like this over here, and they lay their eggs. So what they do is they go in and they create individual cells for each of their babies. The females are actually put in the back. So the female bee mates, and then what she does is she puts a bunch of pollen in there, she puts a bunch of nectar in there, and she lays her egg right on top of that nectar sash, and then she covers it up with different types of material. Some of them use leaves, some of them use flower petals, some of them use mud. If you've ever heard of mason bees, I'll probably say mason bees a lot because lots of times that's what will use these bee houses the most common. Mason bees use mud, like masonry, and then they seal it up. Then they collect another bunch of pollen, nectar, lay another egg, and they fill the houses up. So our houses are 6 inches deep, and you want them to be about that deep, because the longer they are, the deeper they can put them in there, the safer the babies are. You don't want to go too deep, 8 inches, no more than 8 inches. But the thing is they put the female bees, they lay female babies' eggs in the back. And then as they get closer to the front, they put in the males. Because, well, it's more important to have females reproducing the next year than a bunch of male bees that can't reproduce. As long as you have one male bee, you're in good shape. So it helps kind of make sure the population is going to be okay for the next year. Now, saying that, if you use a smaller bee box, like I've seen, so when I started like looking at plans and kind of figuring out what are we going to do here, a lot of them are shorter and smaller. Well, what that does is it throws off the ratio of females to males, so you want to at least have them a good 6 inches. So that's what they'll do. They'll take these tubes, they'll go in, they'll put in some mud. They may line them if they're leaf cutter. These are called leafcutter bees. They go and they cut out a chunk of leaf. They line their holes with the leaves, put pollen, nectar in there to feed their babies, lay an egg, and do it all over again. I have a number written down. So my memory is horrible right now, so I have to write some things down. But to do one hole, one nest for one baby, it's 15 to 35 trips. So that's 75 flowers in each trip. So for one egg, it's 1,875 flower trips for one egg to get enough pollen and nectar for just one egg. So the reason why places out west that have almond trees, cherry trees, all those fruit trees, the reason why they like these bees is they are so much more efficient than honeybees. So it would take 90,000 honeybees to do the same job as 300 blue orchard bees. So the twig dwellings. So they are much more efficient. They get to more flowers because they have to get to more flowers to be able to get enough food for their eggs. So they are much more efficient when it comes to pollinating as well. Now, these guys, and you'll notice with some of the bee houses in the beginning, they'll nest in all different types of things. All different species use different size holes. So when we put ours together, we'll put different size bamboo in there. So that way, because different species use different size holes, but they'll use different types of material as well. A lot of them, rotten logs is what they would use in the wild, and those logs hopefully have been eaten by beetles or eaten by woodpeckers in the holes. That's what they would be using in the wild is trees that have already the holes burrowed into them. But different bees use different sizes, and so they'll choose which holes they want to be able to fill them up. So this is the kind of twig bees that we will be making homes for. So twig nesters here in Iowa, there have been 55 recorded species. Like I told you before, though, those have gone way back in time. So whether or not we still have those 55 species, or maybe there's more we don't know about, is a possibility. So here I'm going to not try to slaughter these names, but these are the scientific names of the different species. So there's 8 species of the what we would call wood. They go into the wood, and most of those species are, I'll say it, Calididae, I'm guessing. They mostly burrow underground, but there are 8 species that would burrow into wood. There's the Halicididae. There's just one species there. Those are the little sweat bees. So there's one species that does prefer to burrow into stems. But most of them are the Megachilidae family, 46 species. And Megachilidae actually in Latin is big lips. They have really large mandibles. They have lots of horns and spikes usually on their heads, and that is to help move rocks and things like that. So the leafcutter bee here is the Megachilidae. This is the Collididae, and then the middle one there is the Helicididae species. And I don't know Latin. I did not study Latin other than having to learn a bunch of scientific names in college. So I don't use it all that often. Could be slaughtering those words. So when we build our bee houses, we'll build them here in a little bit, and I'll leave this slide up. It's my last slide, just so you can know. When you make your bee houses, part of it is also putting them in a good location. Securing them well. So when the bee lays her eggs, she sets them on top of that nectar pile. If the bee house is shaken during that time period, the eggs can actually fall off, and then the larvae will starve to death because they aren't attached to that nectar pile. So it is really important to make sure that your bee house is secured well to whatever you're attaching it to. And we've kind of ran around different ideas on whether or not to hang them or things like that, but honestly we think what the best idea would be is to get a long drill bit and just drill and attach. Take your bamboo out and then just drill using a long drill bit and it just screwing it directly through the back, so that way it's secure either to a building or a post. Ideal would be building. The more protected, the better that they will do. But the big thing is wherever you put it, you just want to make sure it's secured in there, so that way it's not shaking around. Now, saying that, come fall, and when it starts to get cold, the bees that were laying the eggs have died, and so what's left is the larva in there, and that larva, it wouldn't hurt it. It would help its odds if you took it out, took down your bee house. At this point in time, it'd be safe, and put them not in a heated, warm area because you'll stimulate them and they'll think, oh, it's time to hatch and come out in my house. You'll want to put them like in a maybe a cold garage, an outdoor building, or even just kind of securing them and maybe wrapping them in something to help. You don't want too much moisture because you don't want mold and fungus to grow, but maybe just insulating them a little bit more. Or you can just see if they can survive on their own, because they would in the wild anyways. Eye level, just so you can watch them. You can go higher, 6-7 feet would be fine, but you don't want them too low for other animals and things to get into them. Woodpeckers will try to eat them as well. Mm-hmm.
So if you put them in like the garden shed for the winter?
That'd be perfect. Mm-hmm.
When would you bring it back up?
Late spring, maybe. They have to get warmed up pretty well before they start moving, so I would say maybe end of March. I wanted to say that their bodies have to be at least 90 degrees to be able to function, but saying that they beat their wings to warm up their bodies, so it's not that the temperature has to be 90 degrees. In my mind, I wanted to say it was 50, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I'd have to look that up. So, but they actually, and that's one thing about these bees versus honeybees, is that they can actually function at a colder temperature than honeybees do. So they become more active before honeybees do. So the big thing is and then you can just set them back out where you had them before on the ground, and they'll be fine, is what they said. And that's what, if you actually harvest the cocoons, they said that it'd be fine just to set them in the area of where you had before. So full sun, south side, southeast side, of course, to warm them up. I saw southwest side in one page I read. So all the rest said south, southeast, so that way they get warm, they get the morning sun and they get warmed up. The southwest, they said, because of winter, get warmer sun, and I'm not necessarily sure. I guess if you leave it out all the time, it would be, if that's the only place you have it, and if you leave it out through the winter, that might be okay too. Close to pollinating area, they don't go that far to find what they need to nest. So keeping them close to where you want them to pollinate is huge. And also that there's plenty of food sources around you. Protect from wind and rain. If you have like an overhang of your house or a shed, that's a great place to put them. They will have a little bit of an overhang, but not a big one. So protecting them, like putting them under a garden shed overhang or something along those lines, will help them as well. We're using bamboo. You can get cardboard tubes, but cardboard tubes dissolve in the water, so if you don't have a really protected area, that doesn't necessarily work as well. Providing a mud source. So if you're specifically attracting mason bees, which use mud, you can just put like a pan or a milk jug that's been cut off in the ground, fill it with mud nearby, add water. Like I said, they don't go that far, so if you want to attract them, you need to kind of bring the things that they need close by. Replace tubes every 2 years. So there are wasps, parasitic wasps, there's bacteria, and there's fungus that they all have to cope and deal with and face. And so to help prevent those things from happening, you need to replace your bamboo, or you can get cardboard tubes, or you can use paper. There's all different types of things. They don't encourage plastic. Plastic doesn't breathe well, and it's more likely to hold more moisture. I bought these tubes. They were $1 from Menards in the garden section. So you can get tubes, and then we just cut them. The one thing you have to do, though, is that wherever there is a band on the bamboo, it's blocked. So you actually have to drill them out to make sure you can get all the way through. My coworkers, I'm sure, pretty much love me because of that. And then putting them in a non-heated building during the wintertime to increase survival. So if you are interested in learning about different bees, this is an amazing bee book. It is just awesome. Lots of pictures telling you how to identify them, telling you about populations. And as a naturalist, my favorite part is there's these little brown little breakout boxes, and they always have cool little facts. And this one says, the California almond is a crop that relies on honeybees for seed set. The flowers cannot self-fertilize, and the absence of bees, there is almost no almond yield. Almonds cover over 800,000 acres in California and a large part of the state's agricultural industry. To ensure a harvest, more than 1.5 million colonies of honeybees are placed in the almond orchards each spring. So I love those little facts as a naturalist. But this is an awesome book to be able to read and learn more about. Okay, now the fun part, actually building the bee houses. You're going to see earplugs. You don't have to wear them if you don't want to. I just think when everybody starts to get hammering, it could get a little loud in here. And so if you want to save your ears, you're more than welcome to do that. We've got all of the kits set up in front of you. I do not have the nails passed out yet just because I wanted to make you guys hold off just for a little bit and listen to me talk before we got started. So I'll come around and put some piles of nails on the ground. What you're going to want to do is this is the finished product. You're going to start by attaching the sides to the bottom. And you'll notice that there's really only one piece that you can kind of put on wrong, and that's the top. So these are my kind of bee houses. So there are pre-drilled holes to help prevent the splitting and also easier to put the nails in. And so what you're going to do is the first step you're going to do is you're going to put your sides and you're going to line your bottom up with one end or the other. It does not matter which end. And you're going to hammer in 2 nails on the sides. Okay? Then you're going to put on your back wall. You'll notice there's a hole in the back wall, maybe 2. I don't know if there's only one that's all the way through. And you're going to want to make sure your back kind of lines up with the peaks. You may have to flip it around if it doesn't line up quite right, but this one lines up right. And you're going to hammer that in there, and then you're going to secure your last 2 here. Then the last step is putting on your house. Now your house, there is a front and there is a back. You'll see the holes drilled. One set of holes is drilled closer to the edge than the other. The ones that are drilled farther back, that's the front of your house. So you'll make sure wherever the back of your house is at, you put those that have the holes drilled closer to the edge with the back of the bee house, and then the front is lines up there. 2 nails here, 2 nails here, and then we have all different types of bamboo. what I did bring, I brought some Ziploc bags out. If you're going to screw them in, like how I suggested, you may want to take some of them with you to make them really, really tight and secure. So with this house, what I ended up doing is I put in the big ones first. We have a lot of big ones, so start with the big ones, try to get them all kind of filled in, and then go in and use some of the smaller bamboo to fill in the holes. It's kind of like a puzzle, because some of them go in easy, some of them won't go in easy. If they start to go in and they're about that far, you can take your hammer and you can hammer them the rest of the way, and then they're in there nice and snug, okay? So then that way they don't fall out. But if you're going to be attaching them to a board, you may want to wait to get them nice and snug until you get them attached, so that way you don't have to try to pry these out. Because they are, once they're in there, they're in there. So, okay. All right. I'll come around with nails. Now, does anyone have any questions? It's pretty easy, I would say. Oh, if you want to paint them, completely up to you. I have some paper over there that I prefer you paint on top. And then some paint, some cups for water, and some brushes. And you can feel free. I know some people have longer amount of time for this program and then others. So truly, whatever you would like. If you'd like to paint them, feel free to. If you don't have time, that is absolutely fine too.
Water-based paint.
It's acrylic. So you probably want to seal it up, though, you know, it's up to you. Depends on how hard you work on painting it.
I really like what you did on your house. It's so cute.
It was Tammy did a acrylic program a couple of months ago, or was that a couple of months ago? And I took that idea and I just put it on the bee house. All right. Mm-hmm.
Will they cohabitate?
Mm-hmm. They're very much, they don't help each other out, but they aren't opposed to being around other bees.
And will we attract other non-desirable?
You possibly can. There are wasps that might come in. Saying that, a lot of species of wasps are pollinators. So if you are just wanting to increase pollination, the thing with wasps is they tend to be a little, well, and it just depends on the species of wasp, but some species of wasp tend to be a little bit more aggressive than others. So. Yes?
Would it be okay to put it in a tree or not?
I think as long as you have it secured to the tree, but hanging, and it would probably jostle a little bit too much
like
then.
Attached to the tree would still be okay?
Yeah, I think so.
But then they might not get enough sun.
Yeah, as long as it's south-facing, I think you're okay. And the wind, you know, if you're in like you have a bunch of trees around.
No, I think a specific tree that maybe not
Yeah. Yeah, I think it would, I don't know. Maybe putting it out and just kind of seeing what happens.
How do you get the larva out if your bamboo doesn't come out?
So you'd have to wiggle them out. And so when you put your bamboo in there, you want to make sure maybe not to put them in quite as tight as I had. I don't have any intentions of harvesting my larva. I'm hoping over 2 years that some of those bamboo will start to kind of break down and get softer, and then it'll be easier to pull out. But with bamboo, if you put it in there, then you cut them open, and then you pop them open, and the larvae are like little brown cocoons. And yeah, you rinse them in bleach water to kill fungus, but it doesn't kill them. And then you put them in a refrigerator for a little while. So. So those will go into the back piece.
Okay, so those are going to go in there.
Yep.
I mean, if you feel that you need to, you can.
What's going on?
You were concerned about the brown.
Oh. I may put one. That helps. Just to add a little more.
If it makes it easier, you can sit on the floor and make cameras. I like those photos that has them on the floor, because I think these have too much.
Too high, too far, or stand up, or whatever.